So I'm going to start with a bold statement. And the bold statement is this. Our thoughts have more influence on our well-being and the kind of life we live than any other thing in our human experience. Right? Our thoughts have more power over our well-being and the kind of life we live than any other. And so it's understandable you may be like, well, maybe, but I'm not convinced at all. And I hope that by the end of this little talk, I convince you of that. And so I want to start by first clarifying what I mean by thoughts, because actually a lot of people have different ideas, and a lot of people experience thoughts differently. Some people experience thoughts much more in terms of images and pictures, and a lot of other people experience thoughts much more in terms of language and like little bits of sentences, right? So like commands, like, you should probably do this, or observations, like, that's a nice dress, or, judgments, like, oh, I didn't like how I did that, right? So it's like actual like little bits of language, like like a literal voice inside the head, right? And then another type of thought that people often have is memories, right? So these images that come up from the past of things that happened once. Another type of thinking is projecting into the future, right? Thinking about how things are going to be sometime later than now. Like this includes all of our hopes and our dreams, and so when we refer to thoughts, I'm talking about all of these things, right? So all of this stuff that makes up our mental world, right? As opposed to the physical stuff that makes up, like we talked about last time, the sensations in the body, right? And I don't want you to just take my word for it. I want to take a minute here to have all of you just explore inside your heads and notice your thoughts for 1 minute and count them. So I want you all to count how many thoughts arise in the head in a 1 minute period. So if you feel comfortable, go ahead, close your eyes, and I want you to kind of imagine that you are like some sort of National Geographic like adventure show producer person, and you come across like some rabbit hole, and you have your camera and you just want to film the rabbits as they come out of this hole, right? In a very similar way, think of like you're looking at your mental space and just waiting for a thought to arise, and when it arises, go ahead and you say 1. Another thought arises, say 2. Count them. But be careful about the thoughts that come in through the back door, which are like, you saying something like, wait, was that a thought? That is also a thought, right? Any of this little bits of language, even the stuff that you just think is you, like that's your voice, that also is a thought, okay? So for 60 seconds, on your mark, get set, go. Okay, starting with Andrea. How many thoughts did you count? None.
So because you said that this was an exercise and stuff like
Yeah.
that, I usually do that with myself because I noticed that I pick a lot. So when I shut my eyes and calm down, I block everything out, so there's nothing. So that's what was going on.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're just, when you say you block out, what are you doing?
So I got used to not thinking of anything when I close my eyes, just to like calm down and not think of anything. So that's what happened.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome. How? I have more questions, but I don't have time yet.
I'm petrified of saying this actually, but like I'm on 21 or
21 and 22? That's much more natural and realistic than what this guy just said. No, I totally believe you, but yeah, typically even for someone who practices meditation, I can have in the teens, when I sit for a minute. Body.
I have it, and the last count closer to 100. And I felt like the more I thought about thoughts,
The more they came.
They almost went like infinite. Like I
Yeah.
kept counting them, and then I was like, okay, calm down. And then I had to like slow down, and then it was so
Yeah. So, which is another way of saying there's almost always mental activity happening of some kind or another. When you say infinite, yes, but the more that you begin to pay attention to this, the more you can sense these little spaces between thoughts. And there's some of the sweetest, most peaceful moments, little chunks of time that exist.
I wrote 16.
16?
2.
Wow, 2. With only 2, I'm almost curious to ask, but I won't. Yeah, and Taryn?
Like 10, but I don't know whether to count thinking of the numbers as a thought.
Yeah, I mean, truly they are, right? Like if you say the number and then that number pops up in your head, that's also a thought, right? It's more head stuff, right? So, was there any other little things that you noticed or surprised you while you were doing it? So you had an interesting insight, which is that thoughts are almost infinite, right? Like there's, any kind of mental activity can just build on more mental activity. Any other little epiphanies?
I have really long questions, like or thoughts. Like I just went on for sentences. I was like, wait. That was really long. I was like, I needed to breathe. I was like, okay, let me finish this. And then, what do I have to do to get done by tonight?
Absolutely.
Whoa. Hold on.
That's great. So what do I need to do by the end of today for
Yeah,
tonight?
It was just like a really long sentence that just
Yeah.
wrote out like really simple, but I just made it really long. Like, yeah, that doesn't need to be that long.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting how much with so much of thought, or so much of thought being language, I often wonder what the experiences of people, the kids before they have language, what their little thought world is like, because they must have them also. Okay, one of the things that I first noticed is it surprised me the first time that I did this how long I had to wait to see my first thought. I expected just to be blown away like thought, right? So the fact that there was even a little bit of space, it made me realize that by being alert and paying attention, by asking for it, it actually didn't come as easily. But that's not everybody's experience. But in general, one thing that you might notice as you practice mindfulness is that the more alert you are, the more you pay attention, the more space there is between the thoughts that arise. If for no other reason, because you notice them having a clear beginning and an end, right? Okay, so we all have at least some experience with thoughts now, and I think it's an important question to ask. Why do we think? What is this? Why is this whole thing happening, right? And when you look at it, it's really quite mysterious, right? This voice in our head constantly supplying us with this commentary, with these ideas, with judgments, and a lot of times solutions to problems, right? What do I need to do between now and when how do I plan the rest of my night? This is, it's such a common experience that we often forget how magical it is. So this is like this thing that we have somehow evolved as creatures to be able to, solve our problems, live in a challenging world, thrive in a challenging world, organize our lives, and become the most powerful mammals on the whole planet, right? This is the whole reason, right? We can strategize, we can think ahead, we can remember how things went in the past, And it makes us very, very powerful at solving problems, right? But what happens when the tool that is solving all these problems starts turning everything into your life, including your life itself, into a problem, right? There's this famous saying, raise your hand if you ever heard it, a man with a hammer sees everything as a nail. Has anyone ever heard that before? Yeah, okay. Maybe it's because I'm old. So this phrase, a man with a hammer sees everything as a nail, it's like, okay, so if you have this tool, you want to, you use it on nails, so it's like, oh, I can use it on that, I can use it on that, right? Everything is some version of a nail. So a person with a brain starts to see everything as a problem, to be fixed. And that's a problem, right? That's this almost addictive need to identify and solve problems in our lives is one of the easiest ways that we get clogged, right? And we start living a life that's just not as optimal, not as lovely as it can be, because we're not problems, right? So I just want to start there with this foundational statement that your life is not a problem that needs fixing, all right? And so what are some of these problems that we often think we need to fix? So like, I'm just gonna rattle off a few here. I don't know what I should do with my life. I don't make enough money. I can't find the one. My mom is overbearing. School or work is very hard. My friend forgot my birthday. Nobody understands me, right? These are all thoughts that very naturally come up, or experiences that naturally happen in many of our lives, especially the mom being overbearing thing. So I challenge you to answer the question, are these actually problems? Are they puzzles with solutions that can be fixed? Are all of them even true? Right? This idea of, I don't know what I should do with my life, right? Is there a one thing we should do with our lives? Is there a one thing we're supposed to do? Is there one magical person out there that is supposed to be our partner? These are all thoughts. These are shoulds. These are little expectations that again are little thought forms that arise in our heads. And when we say that not having something like that is a problem, life gets heavy, right? And the other ones of these, like I have an overbearing mom and school is hard, those are just challenges, right? Do you guys see the difference between just the weight of the word problem versus the weight of the word a challenge? Like, how does problem feel versus challenge?
A challenge like you can overcome.
Yeah. It's like you can work with it, right? Or you can at least accept it, right? There's this challenging situation in my life, right? What about a problem? Yeah, it sounds urgent, right? It's it's like almost like this emergency kind of feel to it, right? All right, so your mind loves to create problems for you, and mindfulness of your thoughts, mindfulness of your mind, helps us to notice when we're doing that, when we're like catastrophizing, when we're turning these things that aren't even necessarily problems into catastrophes. Okay, so I want to move from this truth, right, that your life is not a problem that needs fixing, to a few just other general truths about thoughts. And I think these are some of the most important things that any human could discover. I'm going to be bold again and say that, okay? One, I already said this, but I'm going to say it again. There's a whole lot less thinking that happens when we're alert and when we're aware, okay? It's important to make sure that, by being alert, we're not actually just thinking more about the thoughts that we just thought. We're just actually just being aware and noticing them and not getting involved. When we do that, when we're alert, there tends to be less thinking overall. Okay? Second truth. This is huge. This is so, so huge. And so few people believe it or understand it, and that is you don't need to believe your thoughts. You especially don't need to believe every single thought that arises. All right? There's this crazy thing because it's such an intimate part of us, right? It's such an intimate part of our experience that we treat almost every thought that comes up as like the holy gospel, right? This is like, you know, a revelation upon us that we must believe, right? Like, nobody understands me, right? Our thoughts are, what are they really? They're really just tools, right? And so, what do you do with a tool? If it's useful, you use it, right? If it's not useful, you let it go. But it's almost like every single thought that arises in our mind, we have to treat with some like powerful mystical significance, right? So there's a wonderful story about a woman named Byron Katie. Has anyone ever heard of this story or this teacher? Okay, so her name's Byron Katie, and she was a very suicidally depressed person. Mother, husband, who was very suicidally depressed mother who was in and out of mental hospitals, right? And she one day woke up on the floor of one of these mental hospitals that she was staying at, and she was on the floor because she didn't even believe, she had a thought that she wasn't worthy of a bed. She wasn't worried of being comfortable in a bed. So she slept on the floor. And she tells this crazy story that she wakes up this one morning. She doesn't know what happened between when she fell asleep to the morning, but she wakes up and she sees a cockroach crawl across her foot. And instead of like the natural disgust response that you would normally get when you see a cockroach crawling across your foot, she said she felt some of the most amazing bliss she's ever felt in her entire life, right? And she's like, what's happening? This is really weird. I don't even understand. I'm not used to feeling this kind of bliss. And she started to notice every time one of her like classic thoughts came up, like nobody understands me, nobody cares, I'm broken, I'm weak, right? Every time one of those thoughts came up, it popped up and passed, and she didn't interact with it, and she didn't believe it, right? And so she's like, she had this like epiphany that when she believes her thoughts, she suffered, she was in this deep pain, and when she doesn't believe them, she was free. She was free from all that. And there's these very, very rare moments in history where there seems to be this like sudden enlightenment, this sudden like epiphany. All the hard work that we're doing, like studying mindfulness and all that stuff, there's some people who, it's usually people who are suffering profoundly. Another example is this guy Eckhart Tolle, who I mentioned a few times. Also, suicidally depressed person. One day, the pressure of the suffering caused something to snap, something broke, and this identification with thoughts, this believing of everything that arose in his head was gone, right? And these are like beautiful stories of like, you know, you follow the work long enough and this is where it can possibly lead. But this woman is living proof that all of her suffering was due to the fact that she was believing all the negative crap that she was telling herself. Like actually believing it, actually buying into it, when it's just material that arises spontaneously, secreted like sweat in the brain. So she went on to, become this amazing spiritual teacher. Great interview with Oprah, if you guys ever want to check it out. And her whole teaching is based upon this set of questions that you ask yourself, 4 questions, every time that you have a thought that's very stressful or painful or that you're stuck on, right? And the questions are, 1, is it true? 2, can you absolutely for sure know that it's true? 3, how do you react and feel when you believe that thought? And 4, who would you be without that thought? All right, so let's just apply that really quick. Let's apply it to the question or the belief of nobody understands me. Okay, is it true that nobody understands me? I don't know. I understand me, right? It's at least someone. There's a lot of people out there. There's a lot of people. There's the guy who sang the song who said the same thing that I'm feeling right now. Maybe he understands it, right? Right? All right. 2, can I absolutely know that it's true? No, you can't. You can't absolutely know that it's true that nobody understands you. It's impossible, right? So, 3, how do we react and feel when we believe that thought? Well, how would you react and feel when you believe that nobody understands you? Lonely, hopeless, sad, isolated, alone, right? All crappy things if you're gonna go ahead and believe that thought. And who would you be without that thought? Who would you be if you didn't believe that thought? Probably a lot lighter, a lot more joyful, a lot more willing to connect and communicate and try to, be the, feel better. And so, if you reflect on those questions around these really kind of painful, heavy thoughts that we have, you often come to the conclusion, I don't know if it's true, probably not true, makes me feel like crap, I'd feel way better without it, right? And so that allows you to at least build some space, some distance between that thought and not take it so damn seriously, like we often do with our thinking. Okay, cool. Any thoughts, questions so far?
It's like an interesting way of thinking about it, because you say thoughts, they're bad, it's not true, but you still force yourself to kind of believe it's true.
Yeah.
But thinking of it that way, it's kind of like a wall. It's not stop.
Yeah. It's almost like, these 4 questions really are like, okay, a thought is a tool. Is it helpful and useful? Is it making me be the person I want to be? And if it's not, you can let it go out of your tool chest, right? Just toss it away. All right, number 3. This one's even bigger, okay? And even more important. This is the 3rd truth about thoughts. You are not your thoughts. Each of you, are not your thoughts. How much of what we claim to be, of our mental image of who we are, of who we think we are, all started out as a set of thoughts that we thought over and over and over again until they crystallized as beliefs. True beliefs about our sense of self and our sense of identity, right? So are you the procrastinator? Are you the person who's weak and has no willpower, right? Are you the person who's bad at math? Are you the unlovable one? Are you the imposter, right? So many of these thoughts are, these identities, these things that we think about ourselves, about what we are, they just started as thoughts, then crystallized into beliefs about ourselves. But I beg the question, what are any of these our essence? Right? Is this any of these who we are essentially at our absolute core as human beings? What can we say for sure about ourselves as human beings? What absolutely can we be positive about? I would say we can be positive that we are some sort of process unfolding in the universe, right? By process, we are this ongoing, changing, evolving set of biological, chemical reactions, trillions of them happening every second, right? We're the universe unfolding in a little bite-sized package, right? And not only that, but that unfolding is somehow giving rise to conscious awareness. This awareness is able to perceive the whole universe. We're the universe that found a way to perceive itself, to see itself. That's so freaking huge, right? That's miraculous and beautiful and wonderful. And yet we reduce ourselves to, I'm bad at math, I'm the unlovable one, I'm the procrastinator, I'm the one without willpower. It's insane, right? It's like there's almost like something that's it's almost like a mental illness, right? The fact that we can end up believing our thoughts to such a degree that we lose sight of just how wonderful and miraculous like this experience of being a living human actually is. So I almost feel as though if there's one thing that you take away from this talk, it's that anytime we believe something about ourselves, right? Anytime that we believe some thought, we're actually diminishing the miracle of who we are, right? And that's huge. And so obviously we can't go through life just being like, I'm a miracle, yeah, I'm a miracle, right? It would be really weird. It'd be awkward, and people would think you're crazy. But at the very least, every time that you do feel like you're stuck, feeling small, and stuck on some like thought that's, you know, somehow limiting what you actually are, you can remind yourself of that, right? I'm much bigger than this. I'm much bigger than whatever it is that I feel stuck on right now. Okay. And so I have an example from my own life. So when I was a kid, I had two parents that, due to their own history, were not very good at understanding my feelings and what I was experiencing, and acknowledging my hurt when it was there, right? And I learned I started to have some thoughts about that, right? And so I started to realize that the only way, like I had the thought, I don't remember having this thought, but at some point I had this thought, the only way they really understand what I'm feeling is if I throw a fit. And this became my pattern, right? And so you're probably visualizing like a little 4 or 5-year-old Scott throwing a fit. Well, you can also visualize teenage Scott and 20-something-year-old Scott, maybe even a 30-something-year-old Scott throwing a fit, because it was the only way I could break through that block of them not understanding that I was hurting, right? Okay, so what were my thoughts? What were the thoughts? My needs don't matter, my feelings don't matter, and the only way that my needs and feelings matter is when I blow up, okay? You do that, you think that enough times, that becomes a pattern, that becomes a belief system, and it's a belief system that very much doesn't work anymore when you're an adult trying to have meaningful friendships and intimate relationships, right? It doesn't work. And so through my meditation practice and through, I'm not ashamed to say therapy, because I think that it's a wonderful tool that everyone should not be ashamed of doing. This thought pattern, this belief system came to light, and dude, what an epiphany, right? What an epiphany that was life-changing to me, because what does that mean? Oh, I see exactly why this happened, right? I can take those thoughts a little bit less seriously, that my needs don't matter, that I only get my needs met when I explode, right? And I can have two new thoughts, two new beliefs, which is, well, other people's needs matter, right? And my needs matter, and we can find some sort of a negotiated understanding, and both of our needs can be met. Awesome, great, right? If I am hurt and I express that to somebody, and they if they're like, they shoot me down, and they shoot me down enough times, I can just say, bye. I don't want to date my mom. Right? And it's obviously not that easy. It takes practice to get good at these skills, right? But once I realized that I didn't have to be, I was like, you know, taking apart my own cage, right? It's such a powerful feeling. And I'm thrilled by me sharing this with you. I'm thrilled to know that one day you might find your own little thought patterns and things that you are bringing from your own childhoods, and, you know, or just whatever, maybe not even from your parents, but just things that you thought for whatever reason that you don't need to believe aren't necessarily true. And if you just let them go, you get to be the person a little bit closer to the person that you want to be. Okay. All right. Let me pose one more interesting question. What happens when those thoughts aren't just about you, right? These thoughts that we believe aren't just about us, but they're about other people, and specifically other groups of people, right? So what I'm getting at is, how much of the ignorance of racism, sexism, homophobia is the result of thoughts that were inherited or heard, or that just started thinking, that were repeated so often that they became full-on beliefs that we didn't even question, right? There's a kind of a really beautiful moment happening in the mindfulness community with many BIPOC teachers, kind of discovering ways to use mindfulness, to the light of it, to melt some of the what feels like absolutely intractable belief systems that exist around racism, right? And you know, these issues around, you know, ignorance in terms of how we treat each other, they're deep problems, and they're hard to solve. And our other social issues and our political divides, they're very hard to solve. But I do think it's wonderfully hopeful that something like mindfulness has this power to treat some of these issues at the roots, at the very belief, right? The very thinking that gives rise to these ignorant beliefs, right? Okay, these are my truths about thoughts, and I just want to close with just a few little tips about how to relate to them in a more healthy way. So I like expose the problem, and I expose the value of possibly becoming aware of our thoughts. But how do we make it a little bit easier, because the stream isn't stopping anytime soon, right? One is start with being kind to them, right? Our scary thoughts, our negative thoughts, our critical thoughts, a lot of times they started with some trauma. They started with, they're replaying a loop of maybe some criticism that you heard when you were young, right? Or they were lessons you learned, dealing with people who aren't very awake. And so there's often some pain behind them. And if you just say, screw you thought, then you're just adding more pain to you're adding more fuel to the fire, right? So there's this room to just being like, all right, what do you have to teach me? Where'd you come from? And even if you don't know exactly where it came from, you can just be like, I see you, I'm not gonna believe you, but it's cool, it's cool. I'm gonna go on and do this other thing that I care about. Yeah. Two, and this is kind of related, have a sense of humor about it, right? Since I started seriously practicing mindfulness, there are these moments where some stupid thing comes up in my head and I just laugh, right? Something that would have scared the crap out of me, or 10 years ago, 20 years ago, comes up in my head now, and I'm like, right? It's just like this crazy chuckle of the absurdity of the stupidity that comes out of our thoughts sometimes. And when I say stupidity, I mean it in a nice way, right? So there's actually one meditation teacher I know who names his head George. So it's like when George starts like saying dumb stuff, he's just like, I hear you, George, whatever. Okay, 3, write down or notice what I call your top 10 tunes. All right, so we all have these, maybe not 10, but like this 5 to 6 to 7, 8 to 10 stories that are always on repeat, right? The ones that are always on repeat. Like the guy who screws it up, always screws it up, right? Or like I talked about a ton of different thought patterns here. I don't need to repeat them all, but for yourself, notice those, recurring stories that just keep coming and coming and coming. And when they come up, then you can take them a little bit less seriously. You can be like, oh, that's the guy who screws it up song, right? And or that's the we'll never get an A in physics song, whatever it may be, right? And again, all of these things make it so that we're a little bit more distance from our thinking, a little bit taking it less seriously. They're like little paper tigers instead of real tigers that have fangs. And lastly is use people first language as much as possible. Does anyone know about people first language? No? Okay, so there is this really smart movement, I think, in social psychology and education, where instead of, for example, saying a autistic person, you would say a person with autism, right? So that you're emphasizing that there is a person here, right? That is not the label, but there's this aspect of them, right? Or that you're not a procrastinator, you are a person who occasionally procrastinates, right? So do you see how that separates, right? Like by saying I'm a procrastinator, it's my whole identity, right? Like I'm taking a thought and I'm plopping it again on this miracle that I am, right? But if I'm a person who occasionally procrastinates, I am a miracle who sometimes would rather Twitter than doing the work that they're supposed to do. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm gonna close by saying, I'm very excited to share all this with you because you can't unhear everything I just said. You know what I'm saying? You can't unhear it, which means that for the rest of your life now, and this truly is a never-ending process, for the rest of your life, you're gonna start noticing stupid things that your head does, right? Things that limit you, things that you don't necessarily have to believe, and that you can let go of and just be like, that one meditation class with my physics teacher. Yeah, I remember that. And it's thrilling. It's a thrilling process because every time you notice one of these patterns, you're a little bit more free. You're a little bit less out of your cage. You're a little bit more out of your cage, right? And how wonderful is that, right? That's what we're all aiming for here, right? Just being happy, free people. And also, I gotta say, it makes it easier to love. Yeah, it's hard to say it without tearing up a little bit, but the less you're just obsessed about your own damn self, like all these stories about who you are, right? The more you let that go, the easier it is to love in a real way. And that feels great too. So I'll leave it there. It's my mindfulness and thoughts talk. Okay, so we're gonna take about 10 minutes to practice a short meditation on the mindfulness of thinking and continuing this practice of noticing these thoughts, because none of this works unless we actually notice it when it's happening, right? So if we could, again, get into kind of alert position, have a posture that feels comfortable, but but also provides you with enough stability to be awake. And closing your eyes, if that's comfortable. Just like when we did mindfulness of breathing, just kind of like scan your body and notice if there's any tension anywhere. Just notice if there's any places that feel tight, and if it's so, just letting it go as much as possible. Sometimes it helps just to breathe into it. Helps you relax a little. Once you've let go of any tension in the body, move your attention to your breath again. So noticing thoughts is a little bit easier when we're concentrated. And so the best tool we have to get concentrated is just noticing the breath. It makes the mind a little more stable and calm. The same rules apply. If you notice your mind drifting away, just very gently and kindly bring it back to the breath. We're going to hang here for just about a minute, not influencing or interfering with our breathing, just watching it, watching our body breathe. Now that we have practiced some concentration, let's go back to that rabbit hole. And just noticing any thoughts that arise. It might be tempting to get involved with them. It might turn into like a domino effect where that thought leads to one and then that thought leads to another. You can notice that happen, but don't get involved. You're just here to watch. just here to notice. Notice the thoughts about your thoughts. Notice your thoughts about the practice, because those are thoughts too. Those are just thoughts trying to get in through the back door. Notice what happens when you do see a thought. Does it get bashful and immediately evaporate? Does it hang around for a little while? Does it try to tug you into another thought? Do they feel kind of addictive? You're just here to learn, just to understand it. How does all this work? See if you can sense yourself as this big, wonderful awareness, this big, kind awareness in which the thoughts emerge. How could you be your thoughts if they're just emerging in this big open awareness that you are? Take 10 more seconds just to notice anything else there is to notice in your mind. And then turning your attention back to your breath. 3 more breaths. after we meditate. I just want you to indulge me with a question or two. Anything that's curious that you're wondering about, or that came up while you were listening to me speak or the meditation. Yeah, Madi.
I realize some thoughts are more tempting to others. The second time around, it was easier for me to not fall into it. It almost felt like if I touched a thought, then I would fall into its infinite. So I could just let it go. But then some thoughts were more tempting than others, and so that became the recurring thought of like, oh, some thoughts are tempting than others, you know. It's
Yeah.
It almost felt like, okay, stay away from like subjects for like school or projects or like, because that's the ones that I'm like, yeah, let's go for it, let's fix those problems. But I was like, no, that's not what we're trying to turn out. So that's just what I kept here, like just noticing that I had to kind of be in control to some extent, which
Yeah.
is kind of unfair, you know. But every time I start letting go, I start thinking about like what to do tonight or what do I have going on. So.
Yeah. What a huge insight, right? That certain thoughts are really tempting. Be careful with those, but also that I can put the brakes on a little bit, right? I can just notice it and watch it and put my attention back to something else. When I first discovered mindfulness of thoughts and I started noticing my thoughts, every single time I poured a bowl of cereal, before I started meditating, I'd pour the bowl of cereal and I'd have to take my bites on the way to the table. Every single time. And then at some point I was like, oh my God, I don't have to do that, right? I don't have to react to this urge, this like thought, take a bite of cereal. I could, like a reasonable person, bring it to the table first and then start eating it. Just a little thing like that was like, I wouldn't say life-changing, but it's a big deal. Any other questions or experiences arise? Yeah.
Well, when you said like you're kind of like the viewer, that was an interesting take on my end at least because you're your thoughts, like you're engaging, but what do you mean by viewer? And so when I was like, when you said you're just viewing it, I just felt like okay, there's these thoughts. Some of them, like she said, are very tempting. Like you just want
Sink your teeth in.
like, hey,
Yeah.
or just like keep going because it's very dark, like hole going down that
Mm-hmm.
route.
Mm-hmm.
But when I saw it, I was like, okay, it's calm now. And then when I went back into my reading, I sort of noticed that in my yoga too.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like all of that's just not disappeared, but they're just like there, but I'm not engaging.
Yeah, that's like a clap, but for meditators. Awesome insight. Yeah. I mean, I think that your experience, you just had the very first experience of you are not your thoughts, right? There are these experiences, separate experiences that arise in your awareness. Cool. Going once, twice, 3 times. Thank you, everybody. And always a pleasure.